Good afternoon, everyone. This is Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. This is our March 19th, 2020 IEEE-USA legislative update. This is also day 2 of quarantine for me. You may notice that we went low tech this month after trying out some more innovative ways of presenting this information the last couple months. As staff, the IEEE-USA office in Washington is closed, as are most of the offices in Washington, and so staff are now working from home. Given the difficulty of that transition, we decided to keep things simple for this month, but we hope to be reintroducing the more innovative methods of communicating next month. So pretty much everything about everything these days is about COVID-19. In Washington, that is, of course, true. Probably more true here than anywhere else. Legislative, everything that is not COVID-19 has basically stopped in Washington. That's not entirely true. We'll talk about a couple things, but it's most. Capitol Hill is effectively, although not technically, shut down. Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart and Ben McAdams have both tested positive for the plague. A number of staffers have also been diagnosed with COVID-19. So technically, Hill offices are still open, but you can't. There was a movement in Congress and shut down the offices and not let the public in, and it was correctly, I think. Democracy, you cannot tell the public talk to your elected officials. Technically, you can get into their offices, but they are strongly discouraging people from doing so, to the point where we were setting up some meetings and we were told by a few offices, just please don't do this. If you insist, we'll let you come in, but we'd really prefer it if you didn't. Many Hill staff are working from home for the first time. Legislators, for the first time ever, don't actually want to meet with anybody. They will, but they'd rather not. There are no hearings, briefings, face-to-face meetings, or anything else really. Capitol Hill, even the Supreme Court postponed all of its public hearings. All of this, by the way, is exactly how it doesn't work. Washington is all about people. It's all about meeting people and talking to people and planning things and negotiating face-to-face. The idea that Washington will work without people actually seeing each other is a major, major cultural shift. I understand for everybody, suddenly working working from home is a shift and it is an adjustment. But Washington, people, and if you take people, at least the presence of people out of the equation, things get. And so all of Washington, in addition to trying to respond to the crisis, is also trying to figure out how to work in an entirely different manner. And it's, oops, I'm hearing my audio is not working well. Let me readjust this, try that, see if that's better. So as Washington readjusts and tries to figure out this environment, everything that isn't really COVID is kind of being set aside for the moment. We'll start, as we usually do, with a quick political update. Joe Biden has, much to everybody, including my surprise, taken a commanding lead in the Democratic nomination contest. He currently has 1,173 delegates to Bernie Sanders' 881. 1991 are required to win. So if you see that, Bernie Sanders is not actually all that far behind, but Joe Biden has dominated all of the most recent, almost all of the most recent primary contests. So the assumption is that he will likely continue to do so, especially since Bernie Sanders can't actually campaign at the moment, really. Now is not the time to be out shaking hands, particularly if you're 78 years old. Worth noting that Donald Trump secured the Republican nomination on March 17th. He has enough delegates already pledged to him to win the Republican nomination on the first ballot. I believe everybody else has dropped out of the presidential campaign. except for these three, Biden, Sanders, and Trump. There are probably some minor candidates here and there that are still technically in the race, but they are not really relevant anymore. First casualty, incumbent casualty of 2020, Congressman Dan Lipinski, Democrat from Illinois, Chicago, and then southwest of Chicago, lost his primary race on Tuesday. Lipinski is worth mentioning because he is one of our champions on Capitol Hill. He's a former chair of the Research and Technology Subcommittee on the House Science Committee. He was an early champion of autonomous vehicles. He has been a very good ally of ours on sexual harassment. Champion of research regulatory reform that IEEE-USA helped get passed a couple years ago. He has employed one of our congressional fellows, Sean Kimmel, who had a great time working for Lipinski's office, and he is the author of an early AI bill. More on that in a bit. But Dan Lipinski was a good ally of ours, and since this will be his last term in office, we thought we'd recognize him and let you all know that we will miss him. COVID-19 relief bills. Technically, one was passed in February. Another one passed yesterday. This is really all that Congress is doing at the moment. There will be a second, technically a third, relief bill passed sometime soon. The bill that passed yesterday it's targeted at short-term relief, making sure people have enough food, making sure people, and providing financial assistance to individuals that absolutely need it. Cover the entire U.S. economy, but just get people through the next couple of weeks when we hope the economy will start to return to normal. There will be an additional bill that Congress is now going to shift its attention to, looking at the economy itself. This will be relief for the airlines, relief for hotels, relief for companies that are directly impacted by the COVID-19 shutdowns, which I think is pretty much all of them at this point. Not really clear what that's going to look like. I know the airlines have asked for $50 billion. They will probably get something, but it probably won't be $50 billion. IEEE-USA is working to get nonprofit associations, mainly IEEE-USA, included in that relief bill. We have, as you can imagine, and many of you know personally, had a number of conferences had to shut down, and associations are in the meeting business. We bring people together, electronically or otherwise, and in an environment where you can't physically bring people together, the impact on associations like ours is pretty severe. But this is what Congress is working on. As there are pieces in there that directly affect technology workers, we will look at them. But right now, the bills are much broader than that, and so it affects kind of everybody the same. The interesting question is, what are the consequences of all this? What is it exactly that happens when you take an economy, shut it down, and then try to start it back up again? We know we can guess that some things will happen. Infrastructure reliability is likely to get a lot more attention from Congress, and I'll talk about a blue sky briefing. I was going to blue sky black that we'll talk about in a minute. Teleworking and remote communication technologies are going to get a boost as people work from home and they realize the limitations of their Wi-Fi, of their internet connection, of their computers. There'll be a lot of upgrading. Rural broadband and telemedicine will get a lot of attention from Capitol Hill. IEEE-USA has been beating the drum for a decade about the need to boost broadband and Wi-Fi in rural areas. Congress kind of said, yeah, we should do that, but it wasn't really that much of a priority. Well, now it's going to be a priority, because now we're starting to really see the implications of communities that don't have proper internet access in emergencies like this. I suspect cloud computing will become more important as companies realize the need to not operate in one set location. And then there's an interesting question about gig workers. People who are self-employed, people who work out of their homes and therefore probably work over the internet in one way or another, are, of course, less affected than the rest of us, because the rest of us are, becoming those people now as we're forced to work out of our homes. Um, there was, as we've talked about in these updates, movement in California and other places, and we'll talk about California in a second, but there has been movement to kind of rein in the gig economy and rein in gig workers. I wonder how this shutdown will impact politicians' thinking about non-traditional workers and non-traditional working relationships, when those are the working relationships that are going to be working best in the current environment. Speaking of which, AB 5. AB 5, as you all know, is the California law that redefined independent contractors. It was aimed at Google and Lyft, two parts of the gig economy which are not doing well, by the way, because nobody's taking rides, because nobody's going out. But because AB 5 was written so broadly and so generally, it affected pretty much everybody in California that had a non-traditional employment relationship. The negative consequences of the law are increasing dramatically. Things like Grubhub, which a lot of people were counting on to get food, they're having a hard time finding workers. It's not clear how Grubhub employs people under AB 5. But also songwriters and entertainers and theaters and writers, as well as technology professionals and consultants, have all been badly affected by the law. The tech workers in California had been doing an admirable job organizing and getting their voice into Sacramento about the effects of this law. The problem now is that the organizing they've been doing has been put on hold. Visits, rallies, workshops, meetings, all canceled. San Diego was supposed to have a big meeting in a couple weeks. That's been canceled. Worse, there was an AB 5 repair bill starting to work its way through the Sacramento legislature. That bill would address a lot of the complaints that people have lodged against AB 5 and should have included language dealing with tech consultants. Unfortunately, the legislature has stopped doing that. They're focused on academic, which is where their focus should be. But the consequence of that is that the AB 5 fix bill isn't moving. Moreover, the authors of AB 5, the champions of that bill, have dug in their heels and are pushing back against all but some relatively minor tweaks to the bill. And unfortunately for our folks in California, we're going to need more than just a tweak. We have heard, IEEE-USA hasn't done this, but we've heard from some other groups in California advising technology consultants that in order to continue doing their job, they really should leave the state of California. They can continue to be consultants and do what they do from other states, but not in California anymore. And as it's looking like it's going to be a long time before we get a fix to this law, and the law is in place and it is functioning, I suspect we'll start to see more of that as time goes on. A bit of good news: just before the plague shut everything down, the House introduced the National Artificial Intelligence Act, HR 6216. Introduced by Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Minority Member Lucas. Those are the top Democrat and top Republican on the House Science Committee. So that's good. It's bipartisan. These are leaders. It has a great list of co-sponsors behind it. The bill also includes a number of recommendations from IEEE-USA, which is always nice. They had asked us to look at the bill before it was introduced, which we did. Solid bipartisan support. Key provisions: it creates an interagency coordinating committee at OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy within the White House. We're seeing a lot of this in a lot, research regulations, and a lot of other places. Congress is recognizing that having all the different agencies approach essentially the same challenge differently may have its merits, but there needs to be some coordination and there needs to be some forum that forces all the different pieces of government to talk to each other. And so they've created a number of these coordinating committees at OSTP specifically to force the government to at least talk to each other, which is nice. So this does that. That would be quite useful. The bill also creates a network of AI institutes to improve coordination between academia, industry, and the government. It supports standards development, including the ethical the ethical development of AI, which is something that IEEE standards is deeply involved in. It encourages AI research specifically at DOE. As I understand it, they're focusing on DOE because DOE has the best computers, the best supercomputers at DOE, because they used to use them, still do, I suppose. They use them to model nuclear explosions and nuclear weapons, which is something you kind of want to get right. And so DOE is better positioned than most agencies to actually do AI because they have the fastest computers. Also a big section in the bill on AI education and workforce development, which is great and important. Note, and I noted this last week, a recent study that IEEE-USA was a part of found that 60% of STEM jobs, these are jobs that require a background in STEM in some way, 60% of those jobs in the United States don't require a college degree. And so working with community colleges, working with other nonprofits, high schools, are important to prepare workers for an AI environment. And that's not just the computer programmers and the PhD engineers, but it's also the techs and the other folks that are going to have to work with AI that are going to need specialized training. And so this is a fairly forward-thinking bill. It is based on an earlier bill by Congressman Lipinski that I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, it's been kind of set aside. It was introduced and there was going to be a big push for it, and that push has been blunted by the virus. But we expect there to be a major conversation about this in Congress this year at some point. Probably won't pass this year, but the year after a presidential election is always a good year to get stuff done. And so we're optimistic we'll get something next year. A couple things on immigration reform worth noting. First, the Fairness Act. That's the bill that eliminates the country caps. It's still there. It's still out there. Not much has happened with it. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of meetings, a lot of discussion, not very much action. Senator Lee from Utah continues to aggressively push the bill, but every time he pushes, new people oppose it. And since they're trying to move it on unanimous consent, it turns out they don't want to bring it up on the floor of the Senate for a vote because the Senate doesn't have the ability to block amendments. And the concern is if any immigration bill comes up on the floor of the Senate, everybody will put amendments on it for all the other various immigration reform measures, and the bill will just get bogged down in other things, as every major immigration bill has done over the last 10 years. So they have to get it by unanimous consent, which means any senator can object, and every time they try to move it, at least one senator says, nope, I want something. And then they negotiate, and then they give the senator enough to make them happy, and then they bring it up again, and somebody else objects. So that's where we are. This bill isn't going to go anywhere, I don't think, in the next month at the very least, as Kovar takes over everything else. But it's still out there, and it could pass at any time. There was a court case worth mentioning. ITSERV Alliance v. Francis Cisna. Francis Cisna at the time was head of USCIS. The court invalidated a set of rules that USCIS was using to block H-1B applications, particularly from IT service companies. These are the outsourcing companies. IEEE-USA was very supportive of those rules, so we were disappointed in the court decision. The USCIS rules had led to a dramatic increase in the number of H-1B applications that were rejected. You may recall that in previous administrations, H-1B applications were approved just routinely. They really weren't looked at. If you filled in all the spaces on the form, it was approved. Doesn't mean you got an H-1B because they were limited, but it meant the applications were approved. Under the Trump administration, about 30% of H-1B applications have been rejected. It's not clear how the court case will change that, although it does make it likely that it will be easier for the outsourcing companies to get a hold of H-1Bs. It's worth noting that the last 2 years, outsourcing companies were not the primary users of H-1Bs for the first time since, I believe, 2002 or 2003. So it's been a very long time that the outsourcers have dominated that program. At the moment, they don't, and we're kind of hoping it stays that way. Little chat about CVD 2020, which was supposed to be next week. It's not. We, as Jimmy Carter once said, are going to call this an incomplete success. We had 94 IEEE members sign up for the event before we had to shut it down. We had actually secured 118 meetings. We were going to meet with 118 different legislators next Wednesday. And we still had another week to go to sign up a few more volunteers and get a few more meetings. As of late last week, all of those meetings were canceled. The Hill basically let us know that while they would honor their commitments and meet with our people if we absolutely insisted, they really, really didn't want us in there. And so, since the point of the meetings is to build good relationships with the Hill staff, we decided irritating them by exposing them possibly to a plague was not the best way to move forward, and so we have canceled them. IEEE-USA is currently working to reschedule all those meetings as teleconferences. Normally, in normal times, phone calls are less effective than face-to-face meetings because they're easier. And face-to-face meetings both show a level of commitment on our part. You flew all the way to Washington, you went to this meeting, obviously you care. But also it's just an easier way to communicate, and it's how the Hill, up until now, liked to do business. This is, of course, not normal times. Interestingly, we're hearing from Capitol Hill that staff want to do teleconferences, but not video meetings. They don't want to do WebExes. They don't want to do Skype calls. They don't want to do Zoom. And what we're being told is that they don't have the bandwidth or the technology to do it. Now, remember, up until this week, the Hill never worked remotely. Everything was done on Capitol Hill. Everything was done face-to-face if possible. And so while it may be possible occasionally to arrange a video conference with Hill staff, it was really not the normal way of doing things. Turns out, lots of Hill staff simply don't have the capacity to do teleconferences from their homes. Interesting thing that took a lot of us by surprise, including some of the Hill staff when they realized they couldn't do these things. But these are the things you learn when you have a crisis like this. IEEE-USA is going to be doing another CVD next year, end of March. We'll get the exact date as we get closer. But for people who volunteered for this year's CVD, thank you. I cannot guarantee that there will not be a global pandemic next year or some other crisis, but this is the first year that we have failed to hold a CVD in the last quarter century. This is a priority for us. It's important to the organization and to our leaders. So we will be pushing ahead with a CVD in 2021. It'll be a 50% chance it'll be new administration. It'll be definitely be a new Congress. So there'll be lots of things to talk about. So pay attention, and we hope you all will join us next year. Black Sky event I just want to tell you about. IEEE-USA hosted a briefing on Capitol Hill on February 25th on Black Skies. Black Sky events, that is. A Black Sky event is a situation where the electrical grid goes dark for an extended period of time over an extended area. They are very, very bad. It is worth noting that in all the chaos in society right now, the stability of our electric grid is not being called into question. And that is something that we will remind our elected leaders of when time comes and when we can see them again. But that's a big deal. This current quarantine situation is bad, but imagine how bad it would be if the lights went out. And I don't just mean because your teenagers and my teenager will no longer be able to get access to their screens, but also then you have food security problems, you have actual security problems, and everything cascades if the electrical grid goes down. So our briefing on the 25th was very well received. We had an overcapacity crowd. You can see a picture there of the room. It was not a particularly big room because we didn't know how much interest there would be, and it was absolutely jam-packed. You can see a couple vacant seats in this particular picture. Within 20 minutes, they were all filled up. The event, by the way, was co-sponsored by the Electronic Infrastructure Security Council, EIS Council. That is a group dedicated to looking at and trying to prevent and trying to develop responses to Black Sky events. John Twitchell, former IEEE-USA board member, is an active leader of that group, which is how we got involved. Given the situation in society with the plague, I suspect interest in things like this will only go up. Congress is going to have to do a lot of thinking about our emergency response capabilities. And the first way to respond to an emergency is do things to prevent it. Daryl just asked me to remind you that I will be videotaping the training CVD participants were going to receive. Go back a little bit. We were going to do a training session on Tuesday. Obviously, we won't because we're not legally allowed to have a meeting on Capitol Hill anymore. I will be recording that training session tomorrow, and it will be available online shortly thereafter if anybody's interested. Our next update will be April 16th, and this time I'd actually verified the date before putting it in my presentation, so that will be the date. Pay attention to your email. The format and the kind of the technology we're using to present this may change for next month. As I said, IEEE-USA staff are adjusting to this like everybody else, and so we're kind of figuring this out as we go. So I'm not sure what form our update will take next month, but it will happen on the 16th at 1:00 p.m. Daryl, did we have any questions, comments that I thought I responded to?
Besides the question about the video and the CVD, that's it.
Okay. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA. Not currently in Washington, D.C., but very close by. My phone number, which still does work, 202-530-8326. Email is always effective, r.t.harrison@ieee.org. Hope everyone stays safe.
Russ.
Yes,
Okay, someone just asked.
Safe?
No, someone just asked a question. It says, with the rapid changes, any chance to do an earlier update?
I'm willing to do that. Putting these things together is not all that difficult. The question is there going to be anything worth updating? Congress is going to be focusing almost exclusively for at least the next week, probably the next 2 weeks, on responses to the plague. Now, if folks want me to give updates on that specifically, I can do that. But I usually focus my comments on things that are of unique interest to IEEE members. And of course, all IEEE members in the United States are concerned about what the government is doing to battle the plague, but they're not specific to us. But if you would like me to give an update on what Congress is working on, I certainly can do that. So if there's interest, send us an email, give us a call, and let us know, because we can put that together fairly easily.
I totally agree. Russ, like I said, there are no other questions. So if you were done, we want to thank you so much. We want to thank all those people who are attending.
Thank you guys very much. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you all in a month at the latest.
All right. Cool. Bye-bye. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.